The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap carpet cleaner. Darren walked in holding a printed email. He dropped it on the table like it was a piece of trash. "You're backing up company files to a personal encrypted drive," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp. I looked around the room. 8 coworkers. All watching. My name is Nora Haynes. I was 32 years old. For years into a compliance analyst role I had worked extremely hard to earn. I had 2 degrees, a professional certification, and a track record of catching problems before they became disasters. I was not reckless. I was not difficult. I was the person the company quietly depended on, until the day depending on me became inconvenient. "It's a standard disaster recovery practice," I said. "Regulatory guidelines require that. We're not a government agency." He cut me off before I could finish. "We're a mid-size procurement company. Not the Pentagon." A few people smiled. Someone near the window laughed quietly into his fist. I kept my face calm. Losing vendor records during an audit could cost this company. "Delete it," Darren said. "Today. Before end of business." He turned away like the conversation was already over. The meeting moved on to quarterly targets. Nobody looked at me again. I sat there, hands folded on the table, feeling like I had already disappeared from the room. I drove home that evening feeling small and angry. But somewhere between the parking garage and my front door, something settled inside me. He had called me paranoid in front of everyone. I had nodded. And I had not deleted a single file. The next all-hands meeting was 2 weeks later. Darren stood at the front of the room with a projector clicker in his hand. He clicked to a slide that read, "Eliminating redundant processes." The second bullet point on the slide said, "Excessive backup hoarding." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. He looked straight at me when he read the bullet out loud. "This company doesn't reward fear," he said. "We reward efficiency." The room went quiet for just a moment. Then people shifted in their seats and moved on. But I felt it. That kind of quiet that means people heard something they're not sure how to react to. The kind where nobody wants to make eye contact with the person being pointed at. I wrote "excessive backup hoarding" in my notes. I underlined it twice. After the meeting, 2 colleagues walked past me without saying a word. One of them gave me a half smile, the kind people give when they feel bad for you but don't want to get involved. I understood then that this wasn't just embarrassment. Darren wasn't mocking my systems in front of the team. He was building something. A case. A file. A reason. And I had just become a problem he planned to solve. The next morning, I sat down at my desk and tried to open the vendor payment database. Access denied. I refreshed, tried again. Same result. I called IT. The technician on the phone sounded uncomfortable. "We're streamlining permissions across the company," he said. "Which departments?" I asked. He paused a little too long. "It's a broad rollout." But I noticed something. I checked with 2 colleagues. Their access was exactly the same as before. The restriction was only on my account. That afternoon, Darren called me into his office and reassigned 2 members of my team to another department. He smiled when he told me. "Trust is important in a healthy workplace, right?" I nodded and said nothing. That evening, I stayed late after everyone had gone home. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. I created 3 new encrypted archives on my personal drive. I organized everything by date. Vendor records. Email threads. Approval logs. Anything I had touched in the last 8 months. I worked slowly and carefully. Because now I was certain of something. Darren was not trying to improve the company. He was clearing a path. And he needed me either quiet or gone before whatever was coming arrived. 3 weeks later, something made me look harder at our billing logs. I was reviewing a routine vendor payment for office equipment. The invoice amount was $47,000. But when I looked at the cost center coding, the charge had been split. $23,500 to operations. $23,500 to facilities. That was strange. The vendor only supplied one department. I cross-checked the last 6 months of records. I found 11 payments that had been split across multiple cost centers in ways that didn't make sense. The totals added up. But the distribution was wrong. Like someone was trying to make large numbers look smaller by hiding them in different buckets. I brought one example to Darren. He barely glanced at it. "You see conspiracies everywhere," he said, and went back to his laptop. That night I didn't sleep well. I sat at my kitchen table and thought about what I had found. The splits were too consistent to be mistakes. Someone had done this on purpose. And the approvals on those payments all had the same signature. Darren's. I went back to my office early the next morning. And I started backing up everything. Not just files. Emails. Approval chains. System logs. Access records. Every piece of evidence that existed, because I had a feeling someone was going to need it. HR called me in on a Tuesday morning. The woman across from me was named Paula. She had a manila folder open on her desk and a look on her face that was carefully neutral, the kind that people practice in front of mirrors. "Darren feels you're resistant to cultural alignment," she said. I wanted to ask what that meant. Instead, I waited. "He's concerned about your attitude toward leadership directives. Specifically your reluctance to follow the new data management protocols." Translation: I was inconvenient. I asked questions. I kept records. Paula slid a form across the desk. It was a coaching plan. It outlined 3 areas for improvement. Words like collaboration, trust, and flexibility appeared multiple times. "We'd like you to focus on building trust with your manager rather than excessive documentation," she said. I read the form carefully. Then I signed it. Paula relaxed slightly. She probably thought that meant I was going to fall in line. When I got back to my desk, I took a photo of the coaching form and forwarded a copy to my private email. Then I saved a scanned version to my personal drive. I documented the documentation. Because if Darren was building a case against me, I was going to build one right back. It was almost 10 o'clock on a Thursday night when I saw it happen. I had stayed late to finish a reconciliation report. Most of the office was dark. I was the only person left on my floor except for one light down the hall. Darren's office. I walked past it on my way to the kitchen to refill my water bottle. His door was half open. He was sitting at his desk, leaning close to his monitor, moving quickly through what looked like an invoice approval screen. He clicked something. The screen changed. I didn't stop walking. I didn't look in more than a second. But I had seen enough to recognize the interface. It was the vendor payment portal. And he had just pushed through an approval. I went to the kitchen, filled my bottle, and walked back to my desk. Then I pulled up my own system and looked at the approval log for that night. At 9:54 p.m., a payment override had been entered. $86,000. Vendor listed as a consulting firm I had never seen before. The approval was flagged as urgent. Normal review steps had been skipped. Darren's credentials. I exported the activity trail. Saved it to 2 separate locations. Then I printed a hard copy and locked it in my desk drawer. 2 months after he called me paranoid, Darren hired someone new. His name was Cody. 24 years old. Fresh out of a business management program, with no hands-on experience in compliance or procurement. Darren introduced him at the team meeting as the future of the department. "Cody is here to modernize our approach," Darren said. Fresh eyes. Fresh thinking. Cody smiled at everyone like he was already in charge. His first week, he came to my desk and asked me why certain vendor files were encrypted. He said it in a casual way, like he was just curious. But I noticed Darren watching from across the room. "Security protocol," I said. "Sensitive payment information." Is that really necessary for a company this size? Cody asked. Yes, I said. It is. I spent the next 3 weeks training Cody on our systems. I walked him through the processes, the workflows, the vendor relationships. I explained why each step existed. He struggled with most of it. The volume of information was too much for someone who had never worked in the field before. And I noticed something else. He kept asking which files could be archived and which logs had to stay active. Those were not questions a new hire asks by accident. Someone had told him what to look for. The call to Darren's office happened on a Monday. I was expecting it. Not the exact day, but I had felt it coming for weeks, the way you feel a storm before the sky changes color. We're moving you to an advisory role, Darren said. He didn't look up from his desk when he said it. Your experience is valuable, but your position needs to be restructured. Advisory meant invisible. It meant no system access, no team, no direct involvement in anything that mattered. You won't need access to the payment systems anymore, he said. Cody will handle day-to-day operations. He slid a paper across the desk. It outlined my new responsibilities. The list was short. Mostly vague words like supporting and consulting, which meant nothing. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at Darren. He was watching me carefully, waiting to see how I'd react. I kept my face completely still. Because what Darren didn't know, and what I had no intention of telling him, was that I already had everything I needed. Every file. Every log. Every approval trail. Every late-night login. Every split payment. All of it backed up. All of it organized. All of it saved. He had stripped me of my access. But he was already too late. About 3 weeks into my advisory role, something started shifting in the company. Finance began asking questions. I heard it in the hallways and in the break room. Payment delays. Vendor invoices flagging internally. Small discrepancies showing up in reconciliation reports that didn't have clean explanations. Darren handled every inquiry the same way. He called it legacy architecture. Outdated systems. Old processes that were too complicated for the current team to manage efficiently. By legacy architecture, he meant me. I understood exactly what was happening. He was laying the groundwork. Planting the idea that the financial irregularities were caused by poor management before his time, by someone who hoarded files and refused to modernize. He was building a scapegoat, and he had chosen me to fill that role. I said nothing. I didn't push back. I didn't argue. I sat in my advisory role and let him talk. But I started keeping a separate log. Every time I heard him use the term legacy architecture in a meeting or an email, I noted it. Date, time, context. Who was present? I was quiet. But I was also watching very carefully. Because I had learned something important over the last few months. Darren only got nervous when he thought he'd been seen. And I had been watching him for a long time. I was eating lunch at my desk when the energy in the office shifted. I looked up and saw Darren standing near the printer, holding a piece of paper. His face had gone pale in a way I hadn't seen before. He read it twice. Then he walked quickly to his office and closed the door. I asked a colleague what had happened. She told me quietly that an email had come in that morning. Subject line, preliminary audit notification. It was from an external regulatory body. They were conducting a review of vendor payment practices across our industry sector. Our company had been selected. Random selection, the email said. Darren called an emergency all-hands meeting that afternoon. He stood at the front of the room and told everyone to cooperate fully and that there was nothing to worry about. But his voice was just slightly too fast. His hands moved too much when he talked. For the first time in months, someone looked directly at me during a company meeting. Not to laugh. Not to make a point. Darren looked at me the way you look at someone when you suddenly realize you made a mistake. And for the first time since the day he called me paranoid in front of the whole team, I almost smiled. The audit team was scheduled to arrive in 10 days. Darren spent the first 3 days doing something I would later describe in testimony as controlled panic with a professional face. He called back-to-back meetings with IT. He asked about document retention timelines. He had Cody pull old vendor files. And then, on the 4th day, Cody came to me looking uncomfortable. "We can't find the historical vendor reconciliations," he said. "Do you know where they are?" I looked at him for a moment. "What do you mean you can't find them?" I asked. He shifted his weight. "The archive. It's been reorganized. Some of the older files aren't showing up." I thought about the night I had watched Darren at his computer in the dark office. I thought about the quiet instructions he had been giving Cody for months. "I see," I said. I said nothing else. Darren held another meeting that afternoon. His voice was controlled, but his eyes were moving quickly around the room. "We're experiencing some documentation challenges," he said. "Legacy systems." I sat in the back of the room and said nothing. Because I already knew what the auditors were going to need, and I already knew exactly where it was. He called me at 8:47 that evening. I was at home eating dinner when my phone lit up with Darren's name. I set down my fork and looked at it for a moment before answering. "Hey." His voice was different. Softer. More careful than I had ever heard it. "Hello, Darren. So. The audit situation." He paused. "We may need to locate some of the older vendor records. For context. You know how it is with these things." I waited. "There's a possibility you may have retained some backup copies. From your previous role." I let the silence sit for a few seconds. "You told me to delete them," I said. More silence. "Did you?" he asked. His voice tried to sound casual. But there was something underneath it. Something tight and careful. I thought about the all-hands meeting. The slide with my name implied in a bullet point. The word paranoid echoing through a room full of coworkers. The coaching form. The demotion to advisory. "No," I said. He exhaled. "Just barely, but I heard it." "Great. That's really great. Maybe we could." "I'll need everything done through proper channels," I said. "Official documentation. Logged requests. Everything in writing." There was a long pause. "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." The next morning I sent Darren a formal email. It was polite, professional, and completely precise. I told him that I was willing to cooperate with the audit preparation process. I explained that any restoration of archived records would require a written request, submitted through the compliance department, detailing which specific files were needed and the business reason for accessing them. I CC'd HR. I CC'd the company's general counsel, and I CC'd my own personal email, just to make sure I had a copy no matter what happened next. Darren responded within 20 minutes. He agreed to every condition. He said it in the tone of someone who had no other choice, which was exactly the tone I expected. I had watched Darren be confident and dismissive for almost a year. I had been in meetings where he talked over people. I had seen him wave away concerns like they were smoke. Desperation looks very different on powerful people. It looks smaller. Quieter. More careful with every word. I printed his response. I saved it to my drive. I added it to the folder I had been building. Then I sent back a brief confirmation and began preparing the files. Everything organized. Everything dated. Everything ready. The auditors arrived on a Wednesday morning. There were 3 of them. They set up in a conference room on the 2nd floor and started requesting documents before lunch. I was not officially involved in the audit. My advisory role gave me no direct responsibility. But on the 2nd day, one of the auditors knocked on my door. She introduced herself and told me she had a few questions about our vendor payment history. She was professional and direct. She placed 3 invoices on the desk in front of me and asked if I recognized them. I did. They were the exact 3 payments I had flagged months ago. The ones with the suspicious cost center splits. I told her what I had found and when. I told her about my conversation with Darren and his response. Then I opened my laptop and walked her through the approval logs I had saved. She asked if she could have copies. Yes, I said. I watched her face as she scrolled through the records. Her expression stayed neutral, but she went very still in a way that told me she had found what she was looking for. She thanked me and left. 20 minutes later, I looked down the hall and saw Darren's face through the glass wall of the conference room. He had gone completely pale. The next morning, Darren made his move. He sent an email to the board and the audit team. I wasn't supposed to see it. But a colleague forwarded it to me quietly without a word. The email described what Darren called documentation failures that had accumulated under the previous compliance structure. He used phrases like insufficient oversight and disorganized legacy processes. He pointed to a period of time that corresponded exactly to the years I had been managing vendor records. He never used my name. He didn't have to. I read the email twice. Then I opened my archive. The backup I had created was not just a collection of files. It was a structured, time-stamped record of every document that had ever passed through my department. Every file had a creation date, a modification date, and a log of who had accessed it and when. The records Darren was blaming me for losing had deletion timestamps. The deletion had happened 11 weeks ago. After my demotion, after my system access had been reduced. After Cody had been given administrator permissions. I prepared a summary document. I attached 37 exhibits. And I sent it to the audit team's official submission portal at 7:14 that evening. Without copying Darren. 3 days later, I received an email from the lead auditor. She asked if I would be willing to present my archive structure and document recovery process to the full audit committee the following morning. I said yes. I spent that night preparing a slide deck. I kept it simple. Clear fonts. Clean layout. No extra words, just facts, dates, file names, and approval signatures. The next morning, I walked into the conference room and set up my laptop. 8 people sat around the table. The board's audit committee chair sat at the head. 2 external auditors were on my left. The company's legal counsel sat at the far end. Darren sat 2 seats to my right. He did not look at me when I walked in. I advanced to the first slide. The title read, Deleted Files, Recovered from Backup. I walked through the records slowly. Every override. Every unusual approval. Every instance of a document that had been deleted, and the exact timestamp of when the deletion occurred. The room got very quiet. Darren shifted in his chair once. Then he went completely still. I did not rush. I did not editorialize. I just showed the data. Because the data said everything that needed to be said. The lead auditor leaned forward after my third slide. Can you clarify who executed these deletions? She asked. I pulled up a second window on my screen. It showed a system activity log with IP addresses, usernames, and timestamps. I expanded the column that showed the login credentials used for each deletion event. They all matched one account. Darren's. The room was completely silent. The auditor looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she turned to Darren. Do you recognize these actions? She asked. Darren cleared his throat. I don't recall approving any deletions of that kind. I clicked to the next slide. It showed a series of screen captures. Each one had a timestamp in the corner. Each one showed the vendor payment portal, with an active session under Darren's credentials. In 3 of the captures, you could see specific override approvals being entered. These were taken from the system's automatic session recording, I said. The timestamps match the activity log. The IP address matches the terminal in Darren's office. The company's legal counsel stopped writing. He placed his pen flat on the table. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Darren said nothing else for the rest of the presentation. By the end of that week, the audit had expanded. What had started as a review of 3 suspicious payments grew into a formal investigation covering 18 separate transactions. The combined value was just over $1.4 million. Each payment had been processed through the same method, split across cost centers, bypassing standard review thresholds, approved late at night with a single override signature. On Thursday afternoon, Cody was pulled into a separate meeting with the external auditors. I don't know everything that was said. But I learned later that he admitted Darren had given him specific instructions during his first week of work. He had been told to archive certain vendor files. He had been told which approval flags to ignore. He had been told that some of the older compliance logs were outdated and could be cleared. He said he hadn't understood what it meant at the time. The company's legal team stopped being present in daily meetings. A separate law firm arrived on Friday morning. Quiet. Professional. With rolling briefcases and no small talk. I watched them walk past my office window. I thought about the night Darren had stood in front of the all-hands meeting and told an entire room that the company doesn't reward fear. He had been more right than he knew. On the following Monday, there was a board meeting. Darren was not in it. I was. A board member I had never spoken to before introduced herself and shook my hand firmly before anyone sat down. She said my name and thanked me for my cooperation. I sat at the table and answered every question they asked. I explained the billing anomalies I had first noticed 7 months ago. I described my conversation with Darren when I brought my concerns to him. I walked them through the sequence of events that followed, the access restrictions, the reassignment of my team, the demotion to advisory, the coaching form. At one point, a board member asked me directly, "Why didn't you escalate through internal channels sooner?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I tried once," I said. His response made it clear that escalation would be treated as insubordination. So I changed my approach. "What approach did you take instead?" "I documented everything," I said. "Every irregularity. Every meeting. Every directive. I kept backup copies in 3 separate locations. And I waited." The board member nodded slowly. Another looked down at the stack of exhibits in front of her. "Thorough," she said quietly. "Not to me." She said it mostly to herself. The company-wide email arrived at 3:15 that afternoon. Subject: Temporary Leadership Restructuring. It was brief. It said that Darren had been placed on administrative leave while an internal review was ongoing. It said that operations would continue without disruption. It thanked everyone for their patience. I read it once. Then I closed my email and went back to work. At 6:30, my phone rang. Darren. I let it ring. He called again at 6:52. Then again at 7:10. I didn't answer. At 7:23, he sent a text. It said, "Call me. We need to talk." At 7:45, he called again. This time I answered. His voice had changed completely. The confidence was gone. He sounded tired and much older than he was. "You could fix this," he said. "You know that." You could tell them the context was different. That the payments were unusual, yes, but there were legitimate reasons. I let him talk. Then I said, "Darren, you called me paranoid in front of the whole team. You had my access restricted. You demoted me. You assigned someone to clear the records." He didn't respond. "I didn't set anything up," I said. "I just didn't delete the backups." I ended the call. The auditors released their formal findings 6 weeks later. The report was 43 pages long. The key conclusions were listed near the front, under a section titled Summary of Findings. The first conclusion was, intentional suppression of compliance documentation. The second, unauthorized vendor payment splitting across cost centers to circumvent approval thresholds. The third, regulatory exposure estimated between $2.1 million and $3.4 million, depending on how a review panel classified each transaction. The fourth conclusion was the one that I read 3 times. It said, full financial reconstruction was made possible by the retention of archived backup records maintained by a member of the compliance team. It said that without those backups, key evidence would have been permanently lost. It said that the company's ability to cooperate with regulators, and to avoid the most severe penalties, was directly tied to the existence of those files. I printed that page and put it in the folder where I also kept the coaching form from HR. The one that told me to stop documenting so much. The one that said I needed to focus on trust instead of excessive documentation. I put them right next to each other. Then I put the folder in my desk drawer and went to get coffee. The call from the board chair came on a Tuesday morning. She asked if I had time to meet that afternoon. I said yes. The meeting was in the same conference room where the audit committee had reviewed my slide deck. This time there were only 4 people in the room. The board chair, the company's new interim CEO, the head of legal, and HR. No Paula this time. A different HR director. They offered me the position of Director of Compliance. It carried full departmental authority. Budget control. Direct reporting to the board. The ability to hire and structure my own team. And a salary that was nearly double what I had been earning before my demotion. I listened to everything they said. I let them finish. Then I said, I have one question before I give you my answer. The board chair nodded. Full authority, I said. Does that mean what it sounds like? Real authority. Not advisory. Not consultative. Not restructured out of relevance the moment I become inconvenient? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, yes. That is exactly what it means. I nodded. Then I accept, I said. But there is one condition. They listened to my condition without interrupting. I told them that if I was going to lead compliance for this company, I needed permanent structural changes to how documentation and deletion were handled. Not policies on paper. Actual system-level changes. I outlined 3 specific requirements. First, no file or record in the compliance or vendor payment systems could be deleted or archived by a single person. Every deletion would require dual authorization, logged with timestamps and user credentials, and reviewed monthly. Second, all payment override logs would be immutable. Once an approval was recorded, it could not be edited, deleted, or hidden. The record would exist permanently. Third, the audit committee would have permanent, real-time visibility into override activity. No exceptions. No blackout periods. No legacy system explanations. I slid a 1-page document across the table. The board chair read it. The interim CEO read it. Legal looked it over and nodded once. The board chair placed the paper down and looked at me. These are reasonable requirements, she said. They're necessary ones, I replied. She extended her hand across the table. I shook it. Nobody in that room laughed. Nobody made a comment about paranoia or excessive documentation or fear. The room was completely quiet in the best possible way. I saw Darren one last time. It was a Wednesday, about a week after I had accepted the director role. I was walking toward the elevator after an early morning meeting when I passed the hallway that led to his old office. The door was propped open. He was inside, packing a cardboard box. His diplomas were already off the wall. The desk was cleared. A security badge sat on top of the box. He heard me in the hall and looked up. He didn't say good morning. He didn't say anything at first. I was going to keep walking. But then he spoke. You set me up, he said. His voice was flat. No anger left in it. Just something tired and dull. I stopped. I looked at him for a moment. At the box in his hands. At the empty frames leaning against the wall. At the desk where he had once slid a paper across to me with the word advisory written at the top. No, I said. I backed things up. I didn't say it to be clever. I said it because it was the only true thing I had to offer. He looked back down at his box. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. 3 months passed. The regulatory review concluded. The company paid a fine for the violations. It was large but survivable. Most of the damage was contained because of the records we had been able to provide. The vendor relationships that had been quietly compromised were renegotiated. The payment systems were restructured. My new dual authorization protocols were built into the software and could not be bypassed without triggering an automatic alert to the board. At the next company-wide all-hands meeting, the interim CEO stood at the front of the room. She introduced me as the new director of compliance. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "This company came close to a very serious crisis. We survived it because one person refused to delete a backup when she was told to. What we called excessive documentation turned out to be the only thing that saved us." She paused. "Redundancy isn't paranoia," she said. "It's leadership." The room applauded. I thought about the first all-hands meeting. The projected slide. The bullet point, the laughter. I thought about everything I had backed up and never deleted. I thought about how being called paranoid had been the most useful thing that had ever happened to me. Then I smiled, and the meeting began. If Nora's story made you stop and think, share it with someone at work who knows what it feels like to be dismissed for doing things right. And if you have ever been in a room where you were laughed at for being careful, stay careful. Document everything. Back it up, because one day, that quiet habit you were mocked for will be the only thing standing between you and someone else's mess. Nora didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she never stopped.